Today I want to share some practical tips and simple strategies for writing a literature review for a lot of students, especially beginners and anyone new to academic research. A literature review is probably one of the hardest parts to start. Whether you're working on your thesis, doing a class assignment, or you've just started grad school and your advisor's first task is go read everything in your field and write a review. The big question is, how do you actually write a good literature review? And more importantly, how do you even begin? In today's video, I'm going to share a few key questions that come up all the time and talk through them based on my own experience. First, let's talk about the structure of a literature review. If you look at a thesis, whether it's undergrad, master's, or PhD, the literature review chapter is always divided into several sections. So, how do you decide what each section should cover? How do you break down your research question into themes? And how do you build a clear framework for your review? That's the first thing we'll dive into. Second, once you have the structure, you need to actually find the right papers for each section. How do you find all the major studies on your topic? How do you make sure you don't miss the key papers? We'll talk about how to search more thoroughly and build a complete set of references. Third, after you collect the papers, how do you write about them? A lot of beginners end up writing like this. Author A did this. Author B did that. Just listing one paper after another, and trust me, your professor would definitely say that's not enough. So I'll share a few common writing patterns and logical structures that can help you present the literature more clearly and more critically. And finally, the part everyone struggles with, the critical evaluation. A literature review has two parts, review and critique. The review part is where you summarize the studies. The critique part is where you analyze their limitations and show what's still missing, which leads directly to your own research question. This is usually the hardest step, so we'll talk about how to approach it and how to write it effectively. Now, I want to recommend two common ways to structure your literature review. The first method is what I call the keyword breakdown approach, basically dividing your review based on the key terms in your research topic. What does that mean? Most research topics contain several core keywords. You can pull those keywords out and review the literature for each one separately. Let's look at an example. Corporate greenwashing and consumers' punitive intentions. This topic clearly has two major keywords. 3. Punitive intentions. So your literature review can naturally be divided into three sections. 1. Green. Discuss how companies exaggerate their environmental achievements or mislead consumers. 2. Punitive intentions. Review how consumers punish companies through actions such as boycotts, complaints, or negative word of mouth. 3. Greenwashing gives punitive intentions. Review studies that examine how greenwashing triggers anger, feelings of betrayal, and ultimately increases consumers' willingness to punish. The second method is building your literature review framework by moving from broad to narrow. This approach works well when your topic doesn't contain many clear keywords. For example, when your research focuses on one general phenomenon instead of several distinct concepts. In that case, you start with the broadest level, review the literature there, and then gradually narrow it down. Let's use this example, female consumer behavior in a US gig economy. Here's how the framework would look when built from large to small. Broad general consumer behavior. Review classic consumer behavior theories, motivation, risk perception, satisfaction, trust models, and so on. Narrower female consumer behavior. Discuss how female consumers differ in decision-making styles, platform trust, safety preferences, and other behavioral traits. Focused female consumer behavior in the gig economy. Examine women's behaviors specifically in gig platforms like Uber or Lyft, such as driver ratings, safety concerns, and platform choices. Integration synthesizing the three levels. Connects the dots. General consumer behavior gives female consumer characteristics, gives real behaviors in gig economy settings. So these are the two main ways to build the framework for your literature review. You can either break your topic down by keywords, or expand your topic from broad gives narrow to structure your sections. Try applying one of these methods to your own research topic. Most students find that one of them fits naturally. Once your framework is set, we move on to the second question. How do you actually collect and organize the literature for each section? We all know that each topic can have hundreds or even thousands of papers, from top journals to very low-quality ones. And if you search manually on Google Scholar, it's nearly impossible to find everything. and definitely impossible to read hundreds of papers one by one. That's why I recommend a much easier tool with unlike traditional academic search engines like Google Scholar or CN, Whispaper doesn't require you to keep changing keywords. And it won't give you pages of irrelevant results. You simply type in your research topic or the title of your section, and it automatically gathers the most relevant papers, then filters and ranks them based on contents. Even better, Whispaper can continuously recommend new papers based on your research area. It's basically a research newsletter that updates itself. Every time you open it, you'll see the latest studies, top conference papers, arXiv updates, so you no longer need to check multiple databases manually. And once you've collected the papers you need for each section, the next step is the actual writing. This approach organizes the literature from the earliest studies to the most recent ones. How do you write this? You could say something like, the earliest and most representative study on this topic was conducted by X, who proposed Y and used method Z. Then, building on X's work, A expanded the research by adding B or introducing a new method C. Later studies continued this line of thinking, making further improvements and extensions. And you move forward chronologically, highlighting how each study builds on the previous one. The key here is, do not just list papers. Emphasize the evolution of ideas. Every time you mention a later study, you should explain. What did it improve compared to the earlier study? What did it add? What gap did it fill? You can usually find these details in the discussion or contribution sections of the papers. This makes your writing much stronger than simply saying, author A did this, author B did that. The thematic research topic approach. Sometimes, a topic doesn't have a clear historical evolution. The research might be scattered. In this case, instead of using time, you organize the literature by themes. You first identify the major themes or subtopics researchers have focused on. For example, Theme 1. What is the concept or definition of this topic? Theme 2. What are its antecedents or drivers? What influences it? Theme 3. What are its outcomes or effects? What does it influence? This three-part logic definition, antecedent through compounds, is one of the most common and effective ways to structure thematic literature reviews. Again, the goal is not to list studies randomly. You should group the literature into meaningful categories and discuss each category as a coherent topic. Finally, the critical evaluation, the hardest part. After reviewing the literature, the last section is the evaluation. This is where you identify gaps in existing research and lead naturally to your own research question. I recommend a two-paragraph strategy. Paragraph 1. Emphasize the importance of the topic. Explain that many studies have already explored the themes you summarized above, showing that this topic is meaningful and has been recognized by the academic community. Paragraph 2. Identify what is still missing. Then point out the gaps. Although existing research has examined X, Y, and Z, it has not addressed the specific issue that my study focuses on. Highlight your study's unique angle or innovation point. This part should connect directly to the contribution and novelty you later write in your thesis or paper. This two-step method clearly shows the topic is important and well studied. But there is still a gap that justifies your research. So that's the basic logic behind the critical evaluation. First, you point out that many existing studies have explored this topic, which shows that your research question is meaningful and important. You highlight what those studies have missed, especially the part that your own research focuses on. Just lay out that gap clearly, and with this simple two-step strategy, your evaluation section will be solid. Alright, these are the main methods for writing a literature review. We covered the 4 key questions that most students struggle with. If there's anything you're still unsure about, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try my best to explain it. That's all for today's video. If you found this helpful, don't forget to follow my channel.